His mother had made it for him with her shining knitting needles and balls of bright yarn. Most of the cap was red, but Mother had used up the last of the red ball of yarn before the cap was done. So she finished the cap in green and made the tassel blue. Anders was very proud of his new cap. He pulled it down over his ears and marched through the house. The gray tabby cat, who had played with those balls of yarn, gazed curiously at the cap. Anders' brothers and sisters stopped and told him what a fine cap it was. But caps, Anders knew, are made to be worn outdoors. He decided to go for a walk at once to show everyone his beautiful cap of red and green and blue. As he marched along the road, a farm boy passed by, leading his horse. He noticed Anders' new cap of red and green and blue, and made him a deep bow, sweeping off his own cap, which was gray. How proud Anders felt. Next, he met a big boy he knew. The big boy wore high boots, and he had a bright new knife in his hand. He stopped short to admire Anders' cap of red and green and blue. He even asked if he could feel the blue tassel. "I like your cap," said the big boy. "I will give you mine for it, and my new knife, too. See, it has 3 blades." Now, Anders had never had a knife, and he wanted that bright new one very much. He could imagine the wooden animals he could carve with a fine knife with 3 blades. But, of course, he would not give up his cap of red and green and blue that Mother had made, not for all the knives in the world. So he shook his head and walked on. The next person he met was a little old lady. When she saw Anders' beautiful cap of red and green and blue, she made him a curtsy like she would to a prince. "How dressed up you are, little boy," the little old lady said. "You look fine enough to go to the king's ball." "Well, I will go," said Anders to himself. "My cap of red and green and blue that Mother made is fine enough for anyone's ball." And off Anders started for the king's palace. At the gate stood 2 fierce soldiers with halberds in their hands and shiny tall hats on their heads. They stopped Anders, and one of them asked, "Where are you going, little boy?" Anders smiled at them and said, "I am going to the king's ball." "But you cannot do that," said the second soldier. "Everybody at the ball has to wear a uniform." At that moment, the princess happened to cross the courtyard. She was dressed for the ball in a beautiful gown of emerald satin, trimmed with golden ribbons. "This little boy does not need a uniform," said the princess. "He has such a fine cap of red and green and blue. I shall take him to the ball." So Anders walked beside the princess, up the white marble steps and into the king's palace. On every side there were ladies in beautiful dresses of silk and satin, and gentlemen in fine uniforms with gold buttons and medals. They all bowed deeply as Anders and the princess passed by. Anders felt sure it was because of the beautiful cap of red and green and blue that Mother had made. At last, Anders and the princess came to a great hall, where there was a long table set with snowy white linen. The plates and goblets on it, and the forks and spoons, were of shining gold. There were great dishes piled high with tiny cakes. There were bowls of trembling jellies, red and green, and baskets of fruit of many kinds. The princess sat down in a chair of gold and told Anders to sit in the one beside her. "And now you must take off your cap, my dear little boy," said the princess. And then she took hold of Anders' beautiful cap of red and green and blue and tried to pull it off. But Anders was too quick for her and held on to his cap with both hands. How could he let his fine cap be taken away? He might never see it again. "Give me your cap," said the princess, "and I will give you a kiss." Now, Anders thought that it was very kind of the lovely princess to kiss a little boy like him, but he just could not let her have the beautiful cap of red and green and blue that Mother had made. The princess coaxed and coaxed. She filled Anders' pockets with cakes. She took her fine gold chain, slipped it around his neck, and she gave him a kiss on each cheek. "Please give me your cap," begged the princess, but Anders still held it tightly with both hands. Just then the doors at the end of the hall opened, and in came the king himself. He wore a long trailing cloak of purple velvet, and on his head rested a golden crown. Beside him walked gentlemen in fine uniforms, carrying hats trimmed with gold braid. The king stopped by Anders' chair. He smiled at his daughter, the lovely princess, and he smiled at Anders. "What a fine cap you have, my little fellow," said the king. "Yes," said Anders proudly. "My mother knit this cap for me of her best yarn. Everybody seems to want my cap of red and green and blue." "How would you like to change with me?" asked the king, still smiling. He put his hands up to his head and took off his golden crown. Then he came close to Anders. He held the golden crown in one hand, and with the other he reached out to take Anders' beautiful cap of red and green and blue. Quick as a flash, Anders slipped down from his chair and ran through the long hall. He dashed down the steps and out into the yard. The cakes tumbled out of his pockets, but Anders did not stop to pick them up. The clasp of the beautiful gold chain, which the princess had given him, unfastened, and the chain slithered off. Still, Anders did not stop. His two hands clung to his cap. His wonderful cap of red and green and blue was still on his head. Anders ran and ran until at last he reached home. He burst into the cottage all out of breath. "Why, Anders," his mother cried out, "why are you running so fast?" He answered, "All the money the king's crown could bring would not buy me a finer cap than this beautiful one that Mother made, of red and green and blue."